Keld, if your negotiation partner uses AI during a negotiation but you don't, how big of a disadvantage does that put you at?
Yes, I would say it's significant. The party using AI has a much better understanding, is much better prepared, and has a much clearer overview. So the advantage is enormous. Really, it's like being in a race where one person is driving a car and the other is running. That's how big the difference is, okay? So there's definitely a reason to pay attention here. Yes, okay?
My name is Dan Rose, and before I have the distinct pleasure of introducing my esteemed guest for today's insightful discussion, I just want to take a moment to remind all of our wonderful and attentive listeners tuning in that this is indeed the highly anticipated and much loved podcast, Yes, You've Got It All. As a parent myself, I can attest that I have kids, and that profoundly means that my daily life is a constant and ongoing masterclass in negotiation training, which is always at a very high and demanding level.
High level. I'm also married, so there's a significant amount of negotiation involved there too. That's precisely how it is. I would say I got truly hooked on the fascinating field of AI, to put it quite briefly, in the year 2019, which in the rapidly evolving world of artificial intelligence is indeed a considerable amount of time ago. And since that pivotal moment, I have intensely and thoroughly immersed myself into looking at the intricate dynamics of AI negotiations.
Nice. Well, let's dive right in. The reason you're here today is because you've written a book about negotiations and AI, and that will be the starting point for this conversation. Because what we're going to learn today is how to use AI to help with negotiations. And I can promise you there will be a lot to learn, because when I read this book, I could really feel that there is actually both the structure of negotiations, but also where AI support really makes a big difference. And then we'll be sharing a cheat sheet with a prompt template. It'll be in our show notes. And since we're talking about negotiation, instead of just jumping straight into what AI can do for negotiations, I think we first need to clarify what a negotiation actually is and what it means. Because in Denmark, we have a particular way of thinking about negotiations. Would you mind explaining a bit about what a negotiation is and when people actually negotiate? Sure.
Well, a lot of people think that negotiation
Occurs
in a meeting room with people in suits or dresses, or that it's something that happens among diplomats. And that's true, but everyone negotiates. Everyone who is watching and listening to us right now negotiates. If you're married, you negotiate. If you have children, you negotiate. If you have a boss, you negotiate. If you're an employee, you negotiate. If you need to talk to your bank, you negotiate. If you're going traveling, you negotiate. In fact, negotiation makes up as much as 80% of what we experience as ordinary communication. I don't even usually put it that way, but whenever A needs to convince B of something, that's a form of negotiation. And now, I've lived in the US for many years, but I was born and raised in Denmark, and there is a cultural difference. In the US, there's a more natural understanding that negotiation is a super important skill, whereas in Denmark sometimes, and I'm generalizing here, it's seen a bit as a conflict. People are a bit afraid of negotiation. They would rather avoid negotiating.
Yes.
Negative connotation. For some people it does. It quickly gets perceived as a disagreement, but that's not what it is. A negotiation is, and I can just ask all the listeners at home, well, if cleaning needs to be done, or the dishes need to be washed, or the dishwasher needs to be emptied, then that's a negotiation that starts right there. So if we both live together and you say, can you, then I say, I did it yesterday, so I'm not going to do it again today, then we have a negotiation. So negotiation is something that plays a big role, and we need to be aware of it, and Danes could get much better at it. I usually like to say, just to provoke a bit from the start, that Danes are bargain hunters. They want discounts, but they don't want to negotiate. Yeah, they really want to knock people down. Yeah, exactly. So it's an important topic. So it's good you brought it up because it's a topic for everyone.
Yes, and something I'd also like to address here is that when you negotiate, what you're really looking for, as you also write in your book, is actually asymmetric value, meaning more value for you than for me and vice versa. And that's really the foundation of all trade. If you have a lot of shoes and I have a lot of pants, then it's great that we can trade them in some way. Exactly. And what I also think, and I experienced this myself, is that Danes have a sense that negotiation is a zero-sum game. You can only win or lose when you're negotiating. But what you propose in your framework is that there's an incredible amount of value to be gained from each other simply by collaborating. So could you try to explain a bit about what makes a good negotiation? Well, a good negotiation is,
very simply put, when you walk away from the negotiation with a better result than you thought you could achieve. That's the short populist version. And I'm glad you brought that up, Dan, because you're absolutely right. A lot of people experience negotiation in that way. If I'm going to make 100 kroner, you have to pay for it. And if you're going to make 100 kroner, I have to pay for it. That means your gain can only come at my direct expense. So if you go out and buy a car, you want a discount of 10,000 kroner. That's good for you, but bad for the car dealer. If, on the other hand, the car dealer succeeds in keeping the price, then he wins. That's what we call a zero-sum game in the world of negotiation. But when we talk about the astronomical value and what we call negotiation economics in Danish, there is up to 42%, as we have found in our research, that the parties often do not discover. In other words, they can't see them, so they leave the negotiation without capitalizing on them. They haven't found them. They haven't taken a share of this home with them. So my claim is actually that no matter whether you're negotiating with your bank, your travel agency, or whoever else you might be negotiating with, salary or anything else, there is a risk that you could lose up to 42% of the value because
don't understand
the difference between a zero-sum game and a collaborative negotiation.
Yes, and it could be things like, for example, delivery times. If you don't make it clear, okay, I actually need the car tomorrow, so I save a taxi ride, and then I might be willing to pay a little bit more. Exactly. Yeah, okay. And that's also what I'm saying. If we as Danes acknowledge that we are in a negotiation, it would also be easier to see these asymmetric values. And then, as I read the book, it also dawns on me, as it always does when you read about something in a particular field, that it's a discipline and a field of study. Just like when you're young, you think that sales is something you're born with, that you're this extroverted type who can convince people of things. Maybe it's the same with negotiation, but it's not. It's a process. And if you do all the boring work, you're way ahead of those who might have been born with it. Is that correct?
Absolutely right, Dan. I've been an associate professor at Aalborg University for many years now, and I teach in their MBA program. So I'm in Aalborg once a year. And what's interesting, and I also mentioned this, is that in the last class I had here in February, there were some women leaders from both the public and private sectors. And the reason I specifically mentioned that they were women is because women tend to find negotiation a bit more uncomfortable than men do. So there were some women before we even started the actual workshop who said, I don't like negotiating. It's a bad thing. It's ugh. And then we went through this 2-day workshop. And afterwards I went over to them again and asked, so what do you think now? And then they said, now we actually like negotiating because now we've gotten a sense that negotiation is something different than what we thought it was. And I think actually that's exactly how I want to put it. I've just said negotiation is about everything from having to empty the dishwasher at home to two companies working together. But let me just emphasize, why do two companies work together? Well, they do it for one reason only. It's to create and distribute value. That's the only reason two companies have ever worked together. So understanding the discipline of negotiation and being able to leverage AI in that context is obviously important because you can create so much more value. So there are enormous values at stake, which you can actually help us a lot to get our hands on quickly.
Yes, and should we just figure out, is there talk about where that is? Because in this book, you write a step-by-step process which consists of 4 main steps: preparation, engagement, value creation, and implementation. Would you try to walk us through those 4 steps?
I'd like to say one of the first things is that preparation is key. I usually like to say not preparing for a negotiation is the same as preparing for failure. And no matter if I'm working with Connor K. Phillips, Boeing, Google, or whoever else, I see far too many people who simply don't prepare well enough. Many times it's not because they don't want to, but because they actually don't know what it is they need to prepare. So the preparation time they give themselves is the travel time in the taxi from their own office to the counterpart's office. So you have to hope it's a long drive. And as I said, it's not because they're not intelligent or unwilling, but because they're not aware of what it is they need to prepare. So I would say that's the very first thing we need to do. And it doesn't matter whether you're negotiating with your child at home, your boss, or whoever you need to negotiate with. Spend time preparing. It won't necessarily be 3 days. Maybe you just need 15 minutes. And here, just to return to AI is fantastic because AI is actually a lot more intelligent than you and me and can remember more of what we need. So we'll get back to that, I'm sure. But AI can help us tremendously in getting really solid preparation. And while I'm talking about AI and negotiation, I want to mention something else. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but if you look at the Olympics, it takes place every 4 years, the Summer Olympics. The event at the Summer Olympics, the Olympics, that carries the most prestige. I don't know if you know which one that is. I'm guessing the 100-meter dash. Exactly. It's the 100-meter dash. I don't know why, but it's incredibly prestigious to run it. And a super athlete at the Olympics runs 100 meters in under 10 seconds. And if any of our listeners right now, Dan, are sitting there thinking, I don't know if that's fast, then just try to measure out 100 meters and time yourself, and you'll find out that's fast. It's insanely fast. And just try to imagine this. These athletes who every 4 years show up to compete for less than tens of hours, they've trained just to compete for less than 10 seconds. For me, it blows my mind because it gives me a sense of just how much we need to train and how much we need to prepare. And that's where I come in. And it's absolutely amazing because AI can help us simulate a negotiation. So I really want our listeners to see right now that they should never go into a negotiation again without having used AI to simulate that negotiation with them beforehand. So, for example, salary negotiations, that's something a lot of people care about. Before you go into a salary negotiation, set up AI to play the role of your boss. Ask AI to challenge you. Ask AI to run through this negotiation with you. That way, you've basically gone through the negotiation before you actually meet with your boss. So a good piece of advice for everyone. Don't go into any negotiations in the future without first running them through with your
AI. Yes, and I completely agree with that, but is the most important thing to try to simulate it, or is it also to ask what parameters can we even negotiate on? Oh yes, well,
I love what you're bringing up now because all of it is important. And I would say part of the preparation is exactly that. Spot on, Dan. You've touched on something very important, which is what we are actually negotiating on. And that's a whole chapter in itself because there is a tendency, I'm generalizing again, that we negotiate on too few things. Let's talk about salary negotiations, which is probably something that interests a lot of people. There are many people who think now I have to go in and negotiate salary with my boss and I earn X now, and now I want to earn X plus plus. But then it's just, I want 5,000 more per month. But can't we agree that if I want 5,000 more per month and you're my boss, then it's a zero-sum game? Because if I am to get 5,000 more, you lose 5,000. If you don't give me 5,000, you've saved 5,000 and I've lost 5,000. And that makes it a tougher negotiation because I say I want 5,000 more and you say you don't. Then here we are. Yeah, then it's an
argument, exactly. What
could you do instead? Exactly as you said, find some other variables. For example, could there be something of intrinsic value, something that has greater value to me but costs you less? I brought up in the cabinet that Denmark raises taxes a little bit. So that means if I get 5,000 more in salary, it's actually almost the state that benefits the most. Isn't that right? They come in and take most of it. So instead of me just getting 5,000 more in salary, maybe we could find an area, as you say, that costs you a bit less but has greater value for me and perhaps wouldn't be taxed to the same extent. It could be that I should, we don't really know the tax rules in Denmark anymore, but maybe I should have had some education finance that I wanted. Maybe I should have had my internet at home paid for. That might mean it gets taxed in Denmark. I don't know, but there could be some other variables I could bring up. So you're hitting on a really good topic, Dan, because expanding the number of variables, I call them variables, all the things we change, is expanding that is one of the secrets to getting a
even better than before
change
some of these things, because I read the book and then I thought, okay, there are many more negotiations than you might think, and you can prepare much more, expand many more parameters, and negotiation isn't the only discipline where you read a book and think, oh, right, we should also do that much better. So we already live in a world where, I also have a job myself where I do all sorts of different things. There are 1,000 different things I have to handle. And now I also have to spend an extra hour a week negotiating, right? Where am I supposed to find that hour? And doesn't that just make things more complicated? One of the things about salary negotiations for me and things like that is that they really shouldn't be like that. So I have some agreements with different employees who get different things, and then suddenly I can't quite grasp how the whole business fits together. So aren't you at risk of things becoming too complex in one way or another?
I completely agree with you on that. And I think one of the questions I often ask my audience when I want to tease them a little is, I usually say to them, can't we all agree that the world today is much simpler, much more transparent, and much more straightforward than it was 20 years ago? Then I can see the audience in every hall where I give a talk thinking, this guy is crazy. And then I say, just raise your hand. All of you who think the world is simpler. No hands go up. So I say, okay, how many of you think the world is more complex, complicated, and unfathomable today than it was 20 years ago? Then a lot of hands go up. So I say, congratulations, humanity. That's fantastic. Now we have all this technology that was supposed to help us become better, faster, smarter, and simpler. But in reality, we experience the world as more complex and complicated. So you're onto something, seeing the world for what it is. But for me, and this might sound a bit cryptic, for me, it's about economics because it comes back to commercial negotiation. Why do we run the business? We do it to create value. So look for where the value is. Focus on where value can be created. Savings for you, gains for me, or the other way around. And focus on that and then prioritize it. Everything else is just a waste of time. So be absolutely firm about it and say, well, where can we actually find something? And then don't spend time on things where we think there's no value. Or again, go back to AI and have AI help you identify, as we talked about, where there is real value. One of the things we're doing a lot now, Dan, is that we sit down with our client and then we take existing contracts, and whether they're employment contracts, delivery contracts, or service contracts, we put them into AI, remove all confidential information, feed them into AI, and then we say, identify variables where you think we can find negotiation leverage. AI knows my concept about Nike economics. It knows me, it knows SmartNash, so you can basically just ask the AI system to act as me and then go in and find it. Then it spends, 16 seconds coming up with a complete list of analyses. It's a contract that says, you've missed this area. Here you could have done something. Here you should have done something else. So back to your area, the complexity increases, but if your gain from investing in that complexity is greater than your cost of the complexity, then it's a good business decision to do it. So for me, it's just a matter of fact assessment of whether we should do it. I mean, a lot of people ask me, now that you're such a change nerd, should you go into Netto and change a liter of milk? Of course we shouldn't do that. It's a waste of time. We shouldn't spend time negotiating something that doesn't give us a return greater than the time we spend on it. So I actually like those kinds of questions.
Okay, and that's typically known as a transaction cost. I think we'll come back to that a bit later. Another thing, I'm jumping around a bit here, is we were just talking about salary negotiations. One thing is the actual facts you're negotiating over, and that's where AI might also face a bit of a challenge. It's all the things we don't say out loud, but which are a big part of the negotiation. I actually used AI myself for a negotiation recently, and it was really great at giving me language that was less confrontational and much more collaborative, and that was awesome. But for example, in a salary negotiation, you might be sitting there thinking, what is actually the goal here? Is it the monetary rational goal that AI will suggest? Or is it something else? Like if you get some education paid for, that's not something you can brag about to your friends on a Friday night over a glass of red wine, telling them how much you make. So even if it's the same, or maybe you've even gotten more, there's some story that needs it. I understand it's an emotionally charged negotiation.
In reality, I usually say that when people are involved, there are always feelings involved. We're going back to what we talked about regarding variables. We work with what we call objective variables and subjective variables. Objective variables are those we can put a price tag on. Finding this asymmetric value. We can put them into a spreadsheet, we can calculate them. Then we have the subjective variables. Those are the emotional factors. We might not be able to capitalize on them, but they can be just as important. For example, why do some people prefer to drive an Audi over a BMW? Sure, some might tell me there's a technical or financial reason, but really it's an emotional thing, isn't it? You might simply prefer the design of an Audi over a BMW or vice versa. That's hard to argue against. And that's something we need to be aware of. Let me challenge you a bit and say that I actually think you are capable of participating in this. A lot of people say, but humans are better at emotions than AI. Yes, but for example, this is a bit personal, I've had arguments with my dear wife where I said, could I get a break? So I went to ChatGPT-10, explained to ChatGPT-10 what was going on, and I got the perfect script for how to handle it emotionally the right way. I went back, used the AI script, and everything went fantastically. So AI can actually help you psychologically to understand emotions, explain emotions in a way that's more advanced than what we ourselves are able to grasp.
Yes, and okay, let me just add to that, because when I read the book, you actually use the disc profile, the one with 4 different personality types, and just the act of considering what kind of person I'm sitting across from, and maybe even asking AI, how should I talk to this person? Because sometimes we forget that. We tend to think a lot about our own world. Absolutely. Is it a simple trick just to say, check IPT, and that's what you use, Copilot? Can't you just look at this transcript, whatever it is, and tell me who I'm sitting across from, and how should I phrase myself?
I did that as recently as yesterday. I took an
Email thread
from a communication I had with another party. Again, I removed any confidential names, uploaded it to ChatGPT. I said, can you give me an analysis of this person? It gave a perfect analysis. How should I communicate with this person? Perfect analysis. How does this person experience the world? Very structured, very detail-oriented, very focused. I got a complete analysis of this person. Is it always correct? No, of course it isn't. But it's a significantly better analysis of this person than I would ever be able to do myself. Every day, new tools are emerging in this field. There's one of these tools that I find fascinating. It's called Crystal, which is available right now, and you can connect it to your LinkedIn. So, for example, if I didn't know you, Dan, and I was going to have a meeting with you, I would use Crystal to look at your LinkedIn analysis. And then it can place you on the disc analysis and say, well, Dan is a DR with a line in, and there's something to see in him as well. On my own, I would analyze your LinkedIn profile. And again, my mind is blown. I just can't understand how it does it, but trust the accuracy. And I've tested it on a number of people. I've also had others test it on my profile. The accuracy is over 90%. I mean, it gets it so right. Just
based on your LinkedIn profile. We have to try that before you leave. I'm actually really excited about that. What is it called? Okay. Let's just try to move on from... No, let's just focus on the trust issues. Because what we're talking about right now is feelings and whether you might actually be able to help us get closer to each other because we speak more of each other's language. And trust in negotiations. We talked about it earlier that in Denmark we have really high trust. That's our secret sauce. And there's a Danish researcher who has concluded that 25% of our GDP can simply be attributed to high trust. And I tried to look it up and ask, where would we be if we didn't have trust? Then we'd be down at a Czech Republic or Italy level economy. So just your quick message to the politicians, if you paint a really bleak picture of the world, then you're also talking about dragging the economy down. But then you also offer a solution for trust between people here, because normally AI is something we see as a potential breach of trust. I want to share
A study, which I have also written about. Last year, we conducted a research project where we had a lot of groups simulate a negotiation. So the groups consisted of two people from all sorts of places around the world. So we had groups of two people negotiating against two other people. We did a simulation of a negotiation, what they were supposed to negotiate about. That didn't matter. And then they had to negotiate, and we divided them into three groups. The first negotiation group negotiated without using AI. They just negotiated old school. Then we had the second group where one party had to use AI and the other party was not allowed to use AI. And then we had the third group where both parties had to use AI. They had the same amount of time to prepare, the same amount of time to negotiate. They had the same case, they had the same content. And the conclusion was incredible. The difference in quality where both parties used AI compared to when neither of them used AI was enormous. One of the things we saw, and I'll get back to answering those questions, one of the things we saw was that in the cases where both parties used AI, they created much more value. They were close to finding all the values in the negotiation. They were much better prepared, and all of them finished ahead of time. Those who didn't use AI followed a very classic school approach. They failed, they took too long, they couldn't find the values, they couldn't reach an agreement. They negotiated, so people negotiated. But what was even more surprising to me, something I hadn't seen coming, was that in the negotiations in Denmark, where both parties used AI, the openness, transparency, the transparent behavior, and the time spent were much greater than in the negotiations where neither of them used AI. So they were more honest, they were more transparent, they were more open, none of them bluffed, and no one lied. So when someone comes to me and says AI makes us less honest, well, our research, and this was among the research we published as a research paper, our research showed the exact opposite. In fact, it actually showed that we became more honest by using AI. And now you'll probably ask me in a moment, why? And then I'd actually say, I honestly don't know, because that wasn't the purpose of this research. I think because I can't prove it, but I believe one of the explanations could be that those who used AI were simply better prepared, of course. And as a result, they became calmer, they could get an overview of everything. And when you're calmer and can see the whole picture, you might feel a little less cornered and less of a need to bluff or withhold information.
or lie. You're not exposed and nervous.
It's about being caught.
Or something like that you don't have. And maybe my guess would also be that the counterpart or collaborator would feel more at ease, sensing that the other person has prepared and knows what's going on and has familiarized themselves with what we're about to do. You're absolutely
right, Dan, because in a negotiation where they didn't use that, you probably wouldn't have been able to ask their questions. What does it mean to you if we were to change the delivery time? And then you would sit there and say, I don't really know. And it's fine that you didn't know, but it can create mistrust with the other party, because now I'm sitting here thinking, why is Dan fumbling with this? Why doesn't he know what it means for him if we... And that's what helps create mistrust in the negotiation, whereas in the other negotiation, they were just super prepared. They knew what was going on. Everything went smoothly and it was much easier. So I've received a lot of comments about the study saying that it's a bit sad that AI has to be a contributing factor to increasing trust among people. Honestly, I couldn't care less what it is. As long as we increase trust among people, then that's just great. And that's what I've seen time and time again, that AI actually helps generate
better trust. Okay, and a natural follow-up question might then be,
there has been this
a thing about whether you're even allowed to use AI in negotiations. I mean, is it okay? I experienced it in the legal industry where lawyers had to be asked by their clients, can we really say when you've used AI, especially in the beginning, because we want to know that? I mean, is it ethical? Should you disclose it if you've used AI in a negotiation?
Would you tell your counterpart in a negotiation if you used a spreadsheet? No.
Of course I wouldn't.
You don't have to say either. You're doing exactly the same thing. For me, AI is just a tool. It's a spreadsheet, it's a calculator, it's Word, it's whatever. If you Googled information, to me, it's the same thing.
But couldn't you turn it around and say, if someone had sat there calculating things by hand as preparation for a negotiation, like if my counterpart did that, I would actually feel pretty uneasy about the negotiation, because I'd think you probably made a mistake in your calculations. So what we're negotiating about could go really wrong right now. And then you'll come back later and disagree anyway. That's
true. I mean, I would say I'm a negotiator who really believes in cooperation, honesty, and openness. I don't think a negotiation is a competition where I'm supposed to try to trick you. So if I take a step back, I actually have an interest in helping you be as well prepared as possible, because it's not in my interest that you don't know how things work, because that would just make my negotiation worse. So I would actually do what I think I mentioned it a bit in the book as well about the ground rules. So before we even get started, I would actually share more information with you. I would also say, through my AI work, I've found these things. I think you should try to do the same. In fact, I would encourage you to do so. So in my negotiation, it wouldn't come as a surprise to you that I've used AI. I wouldn't start the negotiation by saying, listen, I've used chat type 10.5. No, I wouldn't start by telling you that, but already in the initial communication, I would have somehow made it clear that my AI work has given me
this. Yeah, okay. I feel like it would be a huge advantage if you had a PDF tab simply called, hey, this is how you negotiate. And when I go into a negotiation, I just send that over. Some purchasing departments in larger companies should actually do that too, because sometimes you show up to a negotiation and realize, oh, okay, you have this rule that absolutely cannot be broken. And if I had known that before going into this negotiation, so now I have to sit here and redo my stuff. Yeah, maybe we should encourage people to send something like that. Should we try to move on to the engagement phase? Yes.
Well, it's extremely important that when you start negotiating with each other, going back to what we talked about earlier, that you have some ground rules in place. And now I'm going to say something that I know sounds strange to a lot of people, but we have to negotiate how we're going to negotiate before we actually negotiate. And the reason I say that is because the UN has never made a global standard that says this is how we negotiate. Back to what you just said, that there should also be a PDF parking there. So it might be that you experience negotiation like playing chess, and I experience negotiation like playing tennis. And it's not because I'm wrong and you're right or the other way around, but we just experience negotiations differently because there is no global standard for what negotiation is. So one of the things I usually like to say when we enter this area and are about to engage is that I often want to start our meeting by talking about how we are going to negotiate. That is, should we negotiate it as a zero-sum game where I have to make 100 kroner at your expense or vice versa? Or should we create a collaboration where we share information and are open, honest, and transparent? That's something we need to agree on. Then we need to agree on which elements we are going to negotiate before we get started. Are we going to negotiate about 10 variables or 12 variables? And if we are good at finding the asymmetric value, not just economically, how should we share it? All of this is something we need to discuss before we actually enter into the negotiation itself. And that can certainly take time. Many people say it takes an enormous amount of time. It can indeed do that, but all the time you spend on this will save you tenfold later on because you become more efficient, more focused, and you know exactly what you're doing. So people aren't just sitting there playing that game where they don't know each other. I just want to say to all the listeners and viewers here, try to imagine you're watching two people. One is playing chess and the other is playing tennis. It turns into an incredibly comical game. Yes, exactly. Try to picture that. No one really knows what's actually going on. And I know it sounds comical, but that's actually how a lot of negotiations start.
Yeah, okay. And one thing that you write in the book,
Also in this phase is
that there's something called behavioral pattern recognition. And that's a bit of a funny thing because now you're in the US where maybe people are a bit more relaxed about the rules. In the EU, as I understand the regulations, it's basically prohibited now. Yes, that can definitely give me a headache. Yeah. But there's nothing stopping you from maybe having an AI listening in on a negotiation just to help out and say, now you're talking past each other.
yes, I would actually
Almost encourage that.
I myself have just recently invested in this little gadget. So you just hang it up like a microphone and it's AI connected, recording and transcribing the entire meeting. And then afterwards, it creates a summary, a recap, a checklist, and a task list for everyone. And it does it live while we're sitting and talking together. I didn't bring it with me today, but if I had, then when we're done here, I could just go on my phone and there would be a complete transcript of everything we've talked about, plus a to-do list, a checklist, a summary, and a focus list. And among other things, it can also be programmed to tell you to look for variables that can generate necroeconomics. Why wouldn't you use it? I mean, it's just a help for both of us.
Yeah, and if both parties get the transcript afterwards, then there are probably fewer misunderstandings. Okay, that's pretty cool. It might be illegal in the EU, though. I actually don't know. It's behavioral. If you look at things like emotion and sentiment analysis and stuff like that live, then it's illegal according to the AI Act. It's just become illegal. So it's like, the idea is that it can affect people's economic and financial situation, and then you're not allowed to. Okay, the next phase is value creation. And when I saw that, I thought, it's silly that I don't always have it on the agenda because just what's on the agenda are some important things. Oops, now we need to talk about value creation. And there's actually a lot that AI can do here as well. It's about these asymmetric values. Could you try to explain a bit about how AI finds all these parameters? What kind of parameters
Are you looking for?
how you...
I would say that AI thinks a bit faster than you and I do. So that means we can just do a bit of prompting and get the AI ready because you can't just go to AI and say, now you need to look for variables because then it will just be fumbling around in the dark. But if you say, now you need to be Keld Jensen, and I don't say that to provoke myself, but because it knows this philosophy. Now you are Keld Jensen, you know about smartenship and Nico economics, and then go in and start looking for it. Then it knows what it needs to do. because it knows what kind of philosophy it is. It knows what it should be looking for. And then you can basically let it do the work for you in finding some of these variables. Let me share an embarrassing story with you, which actually says more about me than about an AI. And that is, I am human, so I can be dumb. And I want to openly admit that here in front of everyone. And that means that every week I get some inquiries from our clients who say, I have this negotiation problem. Can you help me solve it? There was one at some point where I thought I'll answer that. And as I said, since I'm human, I of course respond as quickly as I can, but in the best way possible. But, a bit lazy. So that should be enough. And then I send it off. Then I thought, now I actually want to try letting ChatGPT-4 answer as me. So I took the question from my client, again, removed everything confidential, went to ChatGPT-4 and said, ChatGPT-4, now you need to answer this as Keld Jensen. And ChatGPT-4 did, but it did it significantly better than I did. I mean, it was much more detailed and much more thorough. It had found more than I had found. And then, to make this tragically comical, I took the answer from ChatGPT-4, which was acting as me, and then I took my own answer and I sent them out to 62 people who know me really well. And then I asked them which of these two answers is from me and which of these two answers is from ChatGPT acting as me. 58 out of the 62 got it wrong. They thought ChatGPT's answer was mine because it was much better. So the embarrassing thing here is that ChatGPT already now in 2025 is better at being me than I am.
You're actually AGI case zero. Cool. That's pretty wild. Okay, it's pretty wild that an AI is a better version of yourself. In a way, it's kind of embarrassing as a human. I actually think it's pretty funny. But okay, what if you're not Keld Jensen? Because one of the challenges you can also encounter when using AI is context. You've written a lot of books, which may have been stolen by OpenAI, so it knows you insanely well. But it doesn't know me as well. I've only written one book, so it doesn't really say much about my way of thinking or what I want to achieve.
Achieve right now?
How do ordinary people gather context? Yeah, that's a
really good question. Well, I would say if you want to get into a discipline like negotiation, now you don't have to just use me. There are many negotiation experts you can use. But regardless of whether it's negotiation, law, swimming, or whatever it is, in my experience, AI, you probably know more about this than I do in Denmark, but AI works better when you ask it to act as an expert within a field that AI already knows. So if your name is Jesper Sørensen and you live in Klampenborg, but you don't have a background in negotiation, there's no point in writing, my name is Jesper, I live in Klampenborg, act as me in negotiation. Because, to be honest, I don't know anything about that. But maybe Jesper from Klampenborg is really good at running the 100 meters, and then you can say, I'm Jesper from Klampenborg, you are now like me, an expert in the 100 meters, and then you can do that. So when I need you for something that's far outside my area of expertise, and that's most of what I do as well because I focus on negotiation, I ask you to act as a specific expert within that field. So I would say, I actually don't think it's important to get AI to act as yourself. On the contrary, I want it to use the expert knowledge available in a given field and then just tap directly into that.
Okay, and that's kind of the way it should handle the professional aspect. But what about the specific context? Like, for example, what's our contribution margin on this product or our delivery costs? You could argue that AI would have hit closer to the mark for Ørsted, and these electricity prices, they were
like,
right? I mean, really,
I would say AI again, and that's a really good question, Dan. I would say AI is good at mixing things. So if I were going into a negotiation about my own case, I would combine the knowledge AI has with my own case, plus, for example, the knowledge Keld Jensen has. So I would upload what I have and then ask AI to act as Keld Jensen, because then you get the best of both worlds. Then AI looks at your challenge, plus the expert knowledge that comes from the negotiation side over here.
Yeah, okay. So maybe it's also about,
Tarun, if you
have a lot of negotiations that you record, can you then take all of them and transcribe them and then feed them into AI and say, remember all this I've said about my costs and my coverage?
Speaking of podcasts, I have a show together with an organization called World Commerce and Contracting, which is a large non-profit organization with 80,000 members worldwide. I run a show together with their president, Tim Cummins, and we've done 38 episodes over 3 years, I think, each about an hour and a half long. We actually took all those 38 episodes, each an hour and a half long, where we've had a bunch of negotiation experts on everything from humor in negotiation to culture to you name it, from all over the world. Just imagine how much knowledge those people have shared with us. An hour and a half times 38. We transcribed everything as much as possible. It was 989 pages. We fed all of it into AI and then asked it to come up with the findings. So what was the most essential thing that all these experts, over 50 people, came up with? And we've gotten something fantastic out of it. And we're actually publishing it as a research paper as well. It's incredible, the knowledge we can get out of it, that you've brought those people in. And I've been thinking, of course, you could have done that 10 years ago too, but now it's just easy. Yeah.
Okay. And it's pretty cool that you can gather context that way, but what about more informal negotiations? I mean, one thing is I lose a lot of negotiations at home because my memory is worse than my partner's. So that happens a lot, and not just to you. So there are often times when I'm like, I honestly can't remember what happened last week. So sometimes you really wish you could just record everything and actually know what it is you're negotiating about. So where's the line? How much context should you collect and record? Now I just have to ask what I'm saying.
That's actually pretty funny. I recently saw a study published in the US that looked at what the average American actually uses AI for the most. And it was actually self-psychological analysis, or analysis of, what's it called, life with one's partner. That's actually right at the top. So I don't know. Apparently there's not much of a future for psychologists and psychiatrists because people are just sitting at home doing it themselves with AI. But you're asking a question about where the line is. Well, I don't think I'm the one to judge where that line is. So I'd rather turn it around and say, love, if AI can improve your relationship with your better half, then that's just a good thing. If you use it to manipulate, then that's just bad. But it's just like a car. You can ask, is a car good or bad? Well, it's bad if you misuse it to run into people. But it's good for getting you from A to B. So back to ethics, it's really up to your own ethics how you use it. It's a tool just like anything else. So if you use it for good, that's great. If you use it for bad, then that's a problem.
And maybe it's just an amplifier of what we already do. I think that's well put. What can you say? If we try to move on to the implementation phase, now we've pretty much agreed, if I understand this phase correctly. Now we need to figure out whether we get it written down and formulated in a proper way. I've experienced myself that you can think you're in agreement. That's actually something that happens quite often in AI. You think you agree on something, and then it turns out you're not at all in agreement about reality when you try to put it into words. Would you try to talk a bit about where AI can
get stuck there? What I often experience is that many people think of negotiation in a context where negotiation is everything that happens before the agreement is made. And it doesn't really matter whether it's a private agreement about emptying the dishwasher or a big deal between two companies. So people think the negotiation goes on up until we reach the contract, then the contract is written, and then we're done with everything called negotiation. I usually like to say that a contract is just a pause in the negotiation process, because many times the real negotiation only begins after the contract is signed. Because then we have to start analyzing and interpreting what the contract actually says. And you say, well, I thought we were supposed to do this. And I say, no, I thought we were supposed to do something else. Because we can't write everything down. One of the things we actually use AI for a lot, as I mentioned earlier, is to analyze existing agreements. Can I actually take a 6-year-old contract, pull it out, and then run it through AI and ask, well, can we optimize this one? Because an agreement is never more set in stone than if you and I can agree that we can get a better result by changing it. Then, of course, we should change the contract. To me, a contract isn't something that's carved in stone. If it's good for you and good for me to change it and to change some of the variables, then, of course, we should do it. So I think a negotiation or a contract should actually be seen as something a bit more fluid, something we can change along the way. Having said that, back to World Commercial Contracting, the organization I mentioned earlier, they do a lot of analysis and research. And they actually conducted an analysis among 80,000 members, where they found that so many members believed, only 16% believed, that in a contract we were actually negotiating the right things. So only 16% thought that we were negotiating the right things in a contract.
even though they were involved in
the negotiation, even though they were involved in the negotiation. So they experienced that companies today sit and negotiate a whole lot of things, but only 16% of everything they negotiate is actually right. And what was even more alarming was that they believed the contract only represented 39%. I just want to double check the number, whether it was 39, 36, somewhere in the 30s%. They believed that the contract was actually value creating for the organization. So I would say, it's not just a question of how we negotiate, but also a question of what we negotiate that suddenly becomes important. So there is a clear message that we are negotiating a lot of the wrong things. World CC also publishes every year, and it's free, so I always encourage people to go and check it out. The most negotiated elements. There's a top 10 of the most negotiated topics and the 10 most important topics. And you would think that those two lists would be the same. They are not at all. The most negotiated topics are things that just make you want to bang your head against the wall. It's things like compliance, regulations, legal stuff, things that really aren't worth it. Those are the most negotiated. And when we look at the most important ones, it's all the things that create value. Payment terms, guarantees, operational efficiency, and so on. Those are the things you should be negotiating now. So there is a complete disconnect between what we actually spend time negotiating and what actually brings value to the table. And why am I talking about this? It's because AI can also help us with that. In other words, actually considering what we should be spending our time on when we're negotiating, there is a tendency, complexities in the contract. There's a tendency for too much legalese to creep into many negotiations. We get too caught up in questions like, what clause do we need to have in here? The top executive at WallCC actually uses a really good expression, saying that a lot of lawyers, negotiate only for the divorce and not for the marriage. So they start negotiating about what we'll do when we get divorced, Dan, instead of focusing on the fact that we haven't even gotten married yet, and now we're already discussing the divorce. I mean, it would be funny if you were getting married and then you start by saying, okay, now we need to agree on what to do when we get divorced, right? That wasn't exactly what we had in mind for our marriage. So I think we need to pause once in a while and then go back to what you said about complexity. I think we need to pause once in a while, take a step back and ask ourselves, why is it that we actually want to collaborate? And which of these variables should we focus on?
Okay, that makes good sense. And I also think that often you get stuck in these strange negotiations about how much you can go after each other if someone doesn't stick to the contract and deliver as agreed. And it's like, okay, that...
Actually, what you just mentioned now is one of the most negotiated BB clauses. Because it could be that I go out and say that you have to cover all my losses.
Yes.
Well, it could be that you end up with a loss of $1 billion. That's what I want you to do.
Cool. I actually once found a contract, it was an NDA, that if you happen to say too much, then the other party would own 25% of my company.
Oh, that's a really new one.
Yeah, it was right there if you bothered to look.
And your firstborn.
Yeah, that. Okay, so one thing I can also read in the book, which I think is pretty exciting and which I always advocate for in artificial intelligence, is that you measure the effect of starting to use artificial intelligence. And you also suggest that. Could you tell us a bit about how, even though you can measure the effect of using AI in negotiations, because that's actually a lot more fun too. Now, there are some people who have started negotiating with AI, made it a thing, kind of turned it into a discipline within the organization. Now, they need to roll it out to the rest of the organization. It's much cooler if you have some numbers to show and say, now let's just see what this does for us.
We already have some clear-cut examples that can be capitalized on. We had a negotiation with ConocoPhillips where they had to negotiate with a supplier. They embraced AI and used it for contract negotiations and found a variable that took less than an hour and generated $400,000, which they otherwise wouldn't have found. And I think already now we only started measuring it within the last 10, 11, 12 months. I think I have 14 of those kinds of examples where AI was introduced into the negotiation and immediately found X amount of dollars.
And how could you tell that it was the negotiation that made the difference?
Because it was the AI that ran through the process, found this variable, went in arithmetically and figured out, well, your interest cost was lower than mine, so we need to turn this upside down. I can't sit here and say, Dan, that if they had spent another month and still hadn't found it, but the AI just did it so incredibly fast. So I would attribute, if not all, then a large part of the credit for this actually happening to AI.
Yeah, and I'll buy that. Because as I read in the book, and as I've also experienced myself, so many negotiations tend to start off slowly. Then there are some pauses where people don't really want to engage because now it gets dry. And then when it's time to close the negotiation, it gets rushed and then it turns out poorly and you don't manage to include all the parameters. Okay, and if we try to look a bit into the future with artificial intelligence and negotiation, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, should we really just hand over all our variables and all our secret data to an AI that promises to say, now I get everything from both parties and I promise not to reveal anything. Now I'll just create an optimal mix here. Or what do you think will happen?
You know what? The tool you just described there, I would actually really like to see because we could get better results out of it. I'm involved in many Bay Area organizations that come to me and say, because of your status, we would like you to take a look at whether our technology is useful in negotiations. And I have to say, there really hasn't been anything yet that's blown me away where I think, wow, that was impressive. Most of them are really just contract management tools that handle the contract, but there isn't much negotiation in them. Or they're tools that do redlining. And for me, redlining isn't negotiation either. So I'm actually missing someone who shows up with exactly what you just mentioned. And I have neither the time nor the knowledge to develop the technology myself. But you're absolutely right. Actually having a third party where you upload your variables, I upload mine, And then you ask the technology to figure out, well, Dan and Keld can get more value if they focus on these 6 variables and drop these 3. And then just tell both of us, this is where you should focus.
Yes, indeed.
Well, I mean, I can dream about things like that at night. It would make life so much easier for so many organizations.
Okay, so if there are any really young tech entrepreneurs out there, they should just go for it.
Yes, absolutely. I can't say anything else, but that's what they should do.
Yeah, okay, because do you think that's part of the future, or are there any other big...
I think that's definitely part of the future. I think one of the questions I've been asked the most over the past 3 or 4 years, maybe especially from people working in the legal world or in procurement, a lot of people come to me and ask, am I going to be replaced by AI? And my answer to them is, I don't know, but I do know one thing, and that is the negotiators who use AI will replace the negotiators who don't use AI. Whether AI will be a replacement or just an add-on, I can't say for sure. There are companies that are already working on what they call autonomous negotiation, meaning it completely replaces you and me, so it's just technology conducting the negotiation. What I've seen so far hasn't impressed me at all, because what they're doing is purely a zero-sum game. For example, Walmart, the world's largest company, retail in the USA, they have implemented it in their purchasing for all the suppliers. They don't have time to sit down with themselves. So they've simply implemented a technology that goes out and negotiates with these suppliers. I've seen them, and as a supplier, you don't know that you're actually negotiating with AI right now because it reaches out to you and says, Dan, thank you so much for doing business with us for the past 6 years. I really appreciate it. But now listen, we need to take a look at your price and your delivery terms because they are blah, blah, blah. And then you have a negotiation going on between AI and the supplier. But you have to say it's purely zero-sum focused because it's only about how much Walmart can earn. Walmart had made a statement about it where they announced that they had saved 1.5%. And let me just say, 1.5% of billions of dollars is a lot of money.
Yes, it's a low margin business, so that's...
Exactly, it's a lot of money they've generated here. And I just want to say I'm not that impressed because they've achieved this at the expense of the supplier. I mean, the supplier has had to pay for this. But of course, it's good for Walmart. And we're going to see a lot more of this. We're going to see a flood of AI bots, agents that negotiate on your behalf. Already now there are, I'm sure it's the same in Denmark, we have phone systems where you have AI calling people doing the work. I tested one of them in connection with the launch of my new book. Instead of us having to call around to the media to promote it, you have an AI bot that calls you and says, "Hi Dan, I'm calling on behalf of Keld Jensen. Would you be interested in writing about his new book, The Smart Negotiator?" And you don't know that you're actually talking to a robot right now, and you can talk to it, you can communicate, it gives answers. And you know, soon, well, then you'll also be able to negotiate with it. So
Okay,
are we being replaced? Yes, we probably are.
okay. Just a couple more points about this, about reaching out and not knowing what you're talking to when it comes to AI. Both of those things are actually illegal in Europe as well. This kind of automatic outreach...
You're not allowed to in Europe.
Yeah, that's true. It's the spam legislation, and as I understand it, and the AI Act says that you have to know if you're talking to an AI. It's kind of... it hasn't taken effect yet as far as I remember, but it's a bit of a strange thing. When are you talking to an AI, and when is it a combination and things like that? Okay, but then what is the consequence of that? Because when I hear that, I think it can do a lot of good or a lot of harm if it's Walmart that's sitting there and pressuring the suppliers, because they'll just end up lowering the quality of the products, and then it's the consumers who have to deal with that, right? And then Walmart just gets even worse.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, all those little negotiations we don't have time to do, where you think I could just call a supplier and talk about whether there might be something. Can they deliver a bit faster? Then I would actually like to pay more, but I don't have time for that.
Some of what is already being used in the US now is actually back to this bot that you can subscribe to. There are many of them who have made these now. If you need to book a hairdresser appointment, personally, I don't need that. But if you do, you can just have your bot call around to 6 hairdressers and ask, I need a haircut on Thursday. Can I get an appointment between 1 and 2 p.m.? And then one of them will say, yes, I have time for that, or no, I don't. And then it will just come back to you and say, yeah, Dan, you've got an appointment at this hairdresser at 4 p.m. on Thursday. You might have saved half an hour by not having to mess around with that yourself.
Yeah.
Like any other technology, if you use it correctly, it's a fantastic help. If you're a business and you need to find a product, you can have your bot call around to 9 suppliers and ask, can you deliver this at this price at this time?
Okay, so if you have the 42% that aren't found in the negotiations that are actually held, how much do you think is hidden in all the negotiations that never take place?
Really good question. I would say that one of the most dangerous negotiations you can ever find yourself in is actually one of those negotiations you don't even realize you're in.
Yes.
And then there are all the negotiations you never attempt. You're right. So those don't count towards the 42%. It's 42% of the negotiations we're in.
Yes.
So there's actually a lot of value out there in that as well.
Okay, that's pretty exciting. It's going to be a wild future. Keld, we started by talking about trust.
Yes.
And I know that's important to you as well. And it's also a big thing in negotiations. And we're also talking about how AI can increase trust. But could you try to explain what role trust plays in negotiations and what is it that we have?
Yes, absolutely. Very briefly, I'll try to break it down a bit. High trust in a collaboration lowers transaction costs and increases profit. And conversely, if trust is low, transaction costs go up and profit decreases. That's a fact. I did my doctoral dissertation on trust AI in negotiation. And we clearly found that negotiations where trust was high performed 34% better than negotiations where trust was low. So trust isn't just a nice thing to have. It's something we need to have because it actually has monetary value. It's not just something that's nice, it's actually something we can capitalize on.
Yes.
See, something that's funny to me, Dan, in the US is that I often use Denmark as a leading example of trust because trust has been high in Denmark, but it's actually declining there. We need to talk about that. So when I use Denmark as an example in the US, it's because trust is very, very low in the US. If we were two different companies in the US and I called you and said, Dan, I'd really like to buy your product. Can you send me some of it? Then you would say, yeah, but we need to make a contract and I need an advance payment and I need a guarantee and we need to get lawyers involved. Why is that? That's the transaction cost going up now. There are a lot of costs involved in making the same deal because you don't trust that I'll pay. The example I often use with Americans is that I say, if the same thing happened in Denmark, company A calls company B and says, hey, Dan, I'd like to buy 300,000 worth of your goods. They look really great. Then there are many people in Denmark who would say, okay, so you send it. And then I include an invoice stating that you have to pay within 8 days. When I give that example in the US, I can see the American executives just sitting there with their mouths open like this. And yet I still hear some people saying, what? He just sent the goods without a contract, without prepayment, without a guarantee. Yeah, they say. But now he's going to get cheated, they say. And then I say, that's an interesting way of thinking. So do you get cheated just because you have the opportunity to? Yes, many times, they say. And I mention this because it's quite funny. Americans don't understand how Denmark even works. Because can't we all agree that Denmark has some of the lowest taxes in the world? Cost of living, the VAT is practically non-existent, car taxes are very, very low, and wages are among the lowest in the world. Denmark is actually not competitive at anything at all. Everything is way too expensive in Denmark, but still, Denmark is doing extremely well. So back to what you mentioned earlier about the 25% of the gross national product being related to trust. I think that's what you said. That's true, because Denmark actually functions because of trust. So I think that Denmark, and now a little jab at the politicians again, really needs to focus on taking care of that trust. Otherwise, you're just Turkey. I mean, then you're no better than anyone else. And it's trust. That's the glue that makes society work. The reason I say that it's also declining in Denmark is, well, I'm a bit of a trust nerd. So, for example, I was just reading some articles from Denmark recently about these roadside shops in Denmark. You know, when you drive around in the countryside, you might pass a farm where they sell strawberries and potatoes and things like that from a stand. And it's all based on trust. You have to put your money in a box yourself. And then I read that more and more of these places are experiencing that people either don't pay or even empty the cash box. That just wasn't something that existed 30 years ago. Apparently ethics and morals were higher back then, so people paid, only took what they could afford, and maybe even paid extra if they didn't have the exact change. Another example of trust declining was months ago when I was in Aarhus working with a client. My Danish partner and I were sitting at a sidewalk cafe in Aarhus down by the water. It was lovely. We were about to have lunch when the waiter came out and said, you have to pay in advance. So I said, should I take that personally? No. She said, you shouldn't. But we've just had the experience that when people sit outside, they tend to run off without paying the bill. So I said, that's really interesting. There's definitely some kind of trust dilemma here because you don't trust that I'll pay for the food after I've received it. But I have to trust that if I pay in advance, you'll actually bring me the food. She looked very surprised. She couldn't quite figure that out. But the problem here again is that there's a lack of trust, which creates some kind of friction. Because if we look at it from an economic perspective, the restaurant's cost to produce the food. If I buy food for 200 kroner, then their cost is, I don't know, shall we say it's 75? If I cheat them, they've lost 75 kroner. Of course, that's a bummer. But if they cheat me, then I've lost 200 kroner. So you have to look at where the greatest risk of being cheated lies. And they actually have less risk than I do. So that's why they should deliver the food without getting paid.
Yes.
So you can, and it's these little things in society. I remember many years ago before I moved to the US. When I traveled in the US, I was already spending quite a bit of time there back then. So when you had to get gas in the US, you would drive to a gas station. You had to prepay. You had to insert a credit card. You had to go in and prepay at the pump itself because there was no trust in the customer in the US. Then I came back to Denmark. Here you would just drive in, stick your nozzle in, and fill up. And every time I thought, how wonderful it is that we live in Denmark. There's trust that, of course, I'll pay. But how is it in Denmark today when you pull in for a fill up? That has changed. And that's how there are these small shifts. And it's like the frog you put in water and then slowly turn up the temperature. Danes don't see that trust is eroding in society and that day by day it's getting worse and worse and worse. So in 10 years, welcome to Turkey, Denmark, if nothing is done about it, then trust will be low.
And why is that? Is it because we're importing these rather non-trust-based ways of being and interacting from the United States of America, or what exactly is it? Or is it perhaps because it's politically and strategically convenient to constantly talk about precisely how truly terrible and utterly awful the world is and has become? Or is it just easier? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there are several factors at play. One of the things I see at business schools around the world is that they've reintroduced the concept of ethics. If you go back in time, the churches used to have an influence. I don't think they have that much anymore today. But in the old days, people would go to church every Sunday and the priest would stand there and lecture you about what was right and wrong. We can have our own opinions about that. But the advantage of that is, maybe I'm a bit naive, but I fundamentally believe that people are good. I think there are very few people who actually want to cheat each other deliberately. Of course, that there are a few who do, but the majority of us don't want to. But what I also know from research is that we need to be made aware of and reminded about what is right and wrong. I mean, I don't think the 10 Commandments were just made up by someone sitting around doing something. Whether it's religious or not is less important to me. But the 10 Commandments were made as a guideline for how we should try to behave. And if no one reminds us from time to time about what we're supposed to do, we tend to drift a bit off track. There's a lot of research on this that I've followed, and one of the interesting things, now I could go on and on, but it would get too long. But one of the things I found really interesting was an experiment conducted in the US where they had students at a university. They divided them into two groups. The first group, when they handed in their exam, was assessed normally by the professor. He would analyze their results and then give them a grade. And they all performed rather mediocrely. Then there was another class where they were told to self-evaluate. So after completing their exam, they were given the correct answers and had to assess for themselves how they thought they had done. They performed astonishingly much better than the other group. Very surprising. So apparently they were either smarter or they cheated.
Yes.
Then they did another experiment where they also let them self-evaluate. But before they self-evaluated, they were asked to read the 10 Commandments very thoroughly.
Yes.
And what was interesting was that the group who read the 10 Commandments and self-evaluated had the same score as the first group that was evaluated by the professor. So that means they were reminded of how we should behave as human beings. And then all of a sudden, they became honest.
Okay, that's super interesting. We could talk about this forever, but at some point, we also have to wrap it up. The last thing we need to...
Yes.
Is your AI pet topic indeed.
Yes, indeed. Well, my AI pet topic is really that we need to use it. And I say that because I'm very curious and I give a lot of talks. And when I'm giving a talk like the one I did 14 days ago where I had 600 business leaders in the room, and I always ask, how many of you are using AI professionally right now? I mean, not just playing around with it at home to find recipes or asking, where should I travel to in Rome, but professionally in a negotiation. I count in that room with 600 people, I counted 10 who raised their hands.
Yeah, okay.
And that really scares me, Dan, because we are already deep into the era of AI usage. And it scares me how many organizations I meet when I ask them a question. Are you using AI strategically now? How many say no? I'm really surprised by how many haven't created a policy, a stance, a strategy, an approach to it. How to use this actively. I mean, to me, it's insane, both comical and frightening that more people don't understand how important this is. I think everyone understands what AI is and everyone knows it's important, but I don't think they've realized just how important it is.
Yes.
So my main point about this is it's just to get started. I mean, it really can't go too fast.
Okay, I think that's an awesome message. Also because you started by saying, when I ask how big the disadvantage is if you use AI and I don't, that it's like running versus driving a car. So if it's only a small percentage who use it, then you just need to get started and you're already in the top 95%.
Yes.
or in the top 5%?
I don't think it's difficult.
No, awesome. Well, it's been really great having you here. It's been really wonderful.
Thank you.